Welcome to today's webinar presented by the Lake Ontario Fruit Program. I'm the moderator for this session. My name is Mark Wiltberger and I'm Business Management Specialist for the Lake Ontario Fruit Program, Cornell Cooperative Extension. Our webinar today is on peel sap analysis for early prediction of bitter pit in Honeycrisp. Our agenda today, we're doing the announcements and then Terrence Robinson will speak to start off with on managing Honeycrisp this summer. Li-Lang Cheng will then discuss peel sap analysis. Mario Miranda Sasso will discuss the sampling and submission protocol for the peel tissue. And then Terrence and Li-Lang will wrap up with some remarks, and then we will have a question and answer session. Just to go over the Zoom basics, if you haven't been on one of these webinars before, you can ask questions at any time during this presentation by typing them in the Q&A window. We will address all your questions at an appropriate time during the presentation. You're automatically muted to start off with, but you can click the raise hand button and then we will unmute you and you can ask a question live at the appropriate time. Please use the chat window for technical questions only, such as audio or video problems, and we will post links to resources as they come up in the chat window. So there's the Q&A window. You click on the button at the bottom that says Q&A. You have to kind of move your mouse and towards the bottom of the screen, and then these controls pop up. And you can click the chat window, the raise hand button, or the Q&A button to open that Q&A window. Our sponsors for today are Valent USA and Valent Biosciences. More information can be found at valent.com. Agro 100 is also sponsoring this webinar. And Agro 100 asked me to present this information about their company and services. Founded in 1990 at the forefront of a new agronomical approach, Ag 100 specializes in the development of soil, foliar, and crop solutions, technologies and management driven by full-time agronomic R&D. They only market products here to provide growers with tools that yield profitable harvest and sustainable high-quality crops. Pomna is a calcium-based liquid nutrient enriched with a complex of adjuvants for a high affinity with the leaf and for greater assimilation. Pomna is ready to lose liquid product with a very smooth action on the leaves and fruit. Using Pomna is conducive to a harvest of superior quality and greater crop preservation. So again, we thank Agro and Valent for their sponsorship of this webinar. And we have additional sponsors for today's webinar and our prediction of bitter pit in Honeycrisp efforts. Niagara Fresh, H.H. Dobbins, Lake Ontario Fruit Inc., LynOaken Farms, Pomna Packing Inc., Sun Orchard Fruit Company, and Wayne County Fruit Sales. And we thank all of our sponsors for making this webinar possible today. We've been doing a lot of webinars this summer, some directly related to horticulture and IPM, and also some COVID-related webinars. And this Thursday, we're having one for apple packing facilities, a Q&A session. And these events are on the front page of the LOF webpage at lof.cce.cornell.edu for links and registration. And on July 20th, the Eastern New York Commercial Horticulture Program is presenting a high-tech precision orchard spraying webinar. And we've been recording all of these recordings and posting them on YouTube, both this COVID series, the IPM webinar that we did, and the past one this past week on irrigation. And you can see within a day or two, we post those up on YouTube and you can come back and look through the information again.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes at the beginning of the meeting just trying to review how we got to this idea of what we're going to try to introduce today. During the winter, we focused a lot on how to manage Honeycrisp in 2020. And we were concerned that it would be a snowball bloom and we would have biennial bearing again the following year. In addition, some of the storage problems that we've had over the last couple of years and successes we've had in different ways to try to manage that led us to put together an entire protocol package to manage Honeycrisp in 2020. I shared this slide at the 2020 Fruit School in February, and we talked about 6 steps to try to manage Honeycrisp in 2020. And the first 3 are already pretty much done. They included precision pruning to manage the number of buds to try to manage better biennial bearing. Then blossom thinning to manage biennial bearing. We talked about ATS. And then precision post-bloom thinning to manage crop load to get to the right fruit number as early as possible. But we also proposed this point number 4 to organize and conduct a area-wide collection of fruitlets to do mineral analysis on the sap from the peel, and then utilize that data to help segregate fruit at harvest, and also to be a guide for adjusting fertilizer programs for next year. We proposed a 5th step, which was coming up in August, and that is to organize again an area-wide effort to collect fruits in August, put them in your barn for 3 to 4 weeks, and look at bitter pit development on these small fruitlets before harvest as a way to predict bitter pit development, and then utilize that information, both the nutrient data we're going to take it right now in July and the data from the bitter pit assay, to determine what kind of pre-storage conditions to use, what kind of storage temperatures, and to help in the marketing strategy, whether the fruit should be stored or not. We also had suggested that in August we would be talking about how to use PGRs to manage harvest and their impacts on post-harvest issues with Honeycrisp. We're still proposing to do that in early August, to have a statewide meeting on pre-harvest management and harvest management of Honeycrisp. But not only that, but all varieties. So this effort results in these 8 sort of steps. We had proposed specifically that in pruning, you prune to a bud load of 1.8 number of flower buds per final fruit number. A number of people tried to do that, and I think some were very successful. Secondly, we proposed to blossom thin using ATS in the pollen tube growth model. That was successful in some cases and not in others, and we're proposing to have a follow-up meeting after harvest to wade into the weeds on that issue and see how we can continue to move forward with learning to blossom thin. We propose to use the precision thinning program and measure fruit growth rates to estimate how many fruit we had thinned off and not over thin. We'd also suggested that summer return bloom sprays be applied with 2 ethereal sprays in late June and 2 to 3 NAA sprays in July. So we're right in the middle of that process, and we're past the ethereal date, and people should be applying NAA sprays every 10 days or every 2 weeks through the month of July. We'd also further suggested that we count number of fruits and use hand thinning to get fruits to the right number when they're 25 millimeters or somewhere around the mid-June. I know that many people have already completed their Honeycrisp thinning, and so we're now right on track to take the last few steps to help identify which blocks have reasonable potential to be stored and which blocks are of concern and should not be stored. Key to that is measuring fruit mineral concentration. And over the past several years, Liling will talk about that, and Mario, we've developed this threshold value of 25 for the potassium to calcium ratio. And we want to look at that in a wide scale for almost all the blocks of Honeycrisp in Western New York to help segregate fruit and then adjust nutrition programs. And lastly, to conduct this bitter pit assay in August. Now we're proposing that that be done on August 11th, and store them for 3 weeks, which would take you to the end of August, early September, which will be certainly before early enough to make decisions by harvest, which we estimate is going to be closer to September 15th this year, because I think we're a little behind other years. And then lastly, we hope all this information will be used by the packing house and storage operators to segregate fruit based upon bitter pit risk and nutrient status, as far as whether or not to precondition fruit and at what temperature to store fruit and for how long to store the fruit. We had hoped that we would get everybody in Western New York, both grower, fieldmen, and storage operators and packing companies, to participate with us, and that we could get almost every single Honeycrisp block in Western New York sampled right now in July, and again sampled in August, so that we could end up with a much better use of the fruit and have fewer losses in storage to unpredicted disorders. We're very pleased at how many people have sponsored this. Many of the packing companies are fully on board, and we get the sense that many people will be participating. Now, we'll talk more specifically about how to do this, but I wanted to try, or we wanted to try to formalize the process. So there will be a way that you have to go to a website and register yourself and your samples, and then we'll work with you to pick them up and get them analyzed and get you the information back. And after we're done hearing from Lai Liang and Mario, I'll come back with just a summary on exactly how that's going to happen and what will happen in August and when you will get the information we develop from this. So with that introduction, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lai Liang Chung, who has done a lot of work on the mineral nutrition aspects of bitter pit, and invite him to make his presentation.
Thank you, Terrence. Terrence just laid out the multi-pronged strategy for managing Honeycrisp. As a part of that, I'm going to be talking about pure sap analysis for managing bitter pit risk in Honeycrisp. Managing the risk of bitter pit is an important part of growing and storing Honeycrisp. As we all know, that bitter pit is a calcium deficiency related physiological disorder, but to me, it's more of a nutrient balance issue than just calcium deficiency alone. We compared pure nutrient levels between Honeycrisp fruits with and without bitter pit. As you can see here, we have two types of fruit. The first one is the control fruit without bitter pit. The second type is fruit with the bitter pit, but there are two pure types. One is the apparently healthy peel from the fruit with the bitter pit. The other is the pitted peel from the fruit with the bitter pit. It's very clear that fruit peel nutrient levels are different between fruits with and without bitter pit. From control, the fruit without bitter pit, to the pitted peel tissue, calcium concentration decreases, whereas potassium concentration increases and nitrogen concentration increases as well. Magnesium shows some increase as well. As a result, fruits with the bitter pit have higher ratios of potassium to calcium, magnesium to calcium, potassium plus magnesium to calcium, and nitrogen to calcium ratios. We all know that rootstock has an effect on bitter pit incidence. And as you can see here, B9 tends to have a lower bitter pit incidence than G11, with G41 and M9 trees being in the middle. This difference corresponds to the pure potassium plus magnesium to calcium ratio really well. Dried pure tissue analysis works fine. However, it takes time because you have to dry the pure tissue after taking the tissue, grind the tissue, digest the tissue before you can do analysis. So we were wondering, is there a quicker and more sensitive method? Is there a quicker and more sensitive analysis we could use for the diagnosis of fruit nutrient status? Since 2016, by working with Dr. Mike Rotsky at the Cornell Nutrient Analysis Lab, we tested the possibility of using pure sap analysis for the diagnosis of fruit nutrient status. Basically, you peel the fruit from the stem end to the calyx end on opposite sides, put them into a Ziploc bag, freeze the pure tissues at least overnight, and then thaw the tissue and by using a garlic press, you squeeze the sap out of the pure tissues, and then directly put the sap onto inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectrometry for nutrient analysis. And this method measures only the water-soluble portion of all the nutrients present in the pure tissue. And as you can see, it's a lot easier to prepare the sample than doing dried pure tissue analysis. And in many cases, it's more sensitive. First, we look at the developmental change of fruit nutrients in Honeycrisp and Gala. These fruits were taken from Scott Vanderwaal's farm in 2017. We did 2 years, both 2016 and 2017 showed very similar results. As you can see here, for the entire fruit, for the bulk fruit, the only difference we saw is lower calcium level in the fruit of Honeycrisp than in Gala. If you look at the pure tissue, the dried pure tissue, Honeycrisp fruits have significantly lower calcium level than Gala, but significantly higher potassium level than Gala in the dried pure tissue. In the sap, very similar trend. And we also compare fruits without bitter pit at harvest. It's the sap analysis is typically more sensitive than the pure dried pure tissue analysis. So to determine if pure sap analysis can be used for predicting bitter pit risk in commercial orchards, we worked closely with Scott Henning and many of his growers at Lake Ontario Fruit. Basically, we identified 30 blocks that have a range of bitter pit incidence, bitter pit risk, and then took fruit samples for 3 years. We started in 2017. We took fruit samples in early July, typically the first week or the second week in July when the fruits were about golf ball size, which corresponds to 50 to 55 gram size fruit. We also took fruit samples at about 1 week before fruit harvest. And then we harvested the fruit. Actually, Mario and Scott harvested the fruits and then evaluated bitter pit incidence and then put the fruits into cold storage and then did another round of evaluation. So for the pure sap samples collected from the pure tissues collected in July, at that time, the fruits don't have any color, so it's a slightly yellow color. And then all the other samples were taken from fruits at 1 week before harvest. At that time, the fruits already have various degrees of red color. So you can tell from looking at the sap samples. So here's a list of those 30 blocks. Actually, we ended up with about 28 blocks. We did 3 years, 27, July 27, July 2017, July 2018, and July 2019. As you can see here, we got a range of potassium to calcium ratios from the SAP analysis. In 2017, it ranged from 17 to about 41. In 2018, very similar. The numbers ranged from 18 to 35. In 2019, the numbers range from 16 to 31. It's very interesting. All the blocks that have top worked from older trees tend to have higher potassium to calcium ratio in the SAP analysis in all 3 years here. And we all know that those trees tend to be more vigorous because they have a large root system relative to a small top. They're more vigorous and each fruit gets more potassium. And also they tend to have more higher nitrogen levels as well. And I just want to show you the 2019 bitter pit data in relation to the pure SAP analysis data collected in July of 2019. As you can see here, the pure SAP potassium to calcium ratio, we ranked all the blocks from the lowest, around 16, all the way to 31. At fruit harvest, bitter pit incidence increases here in terms, corresponding to the ranking, not perfectly, but we saw this trend. And we also evaluated fruit bitter pit incidence at a packout. And the bitter pit incidence also increases as the potassium to calcium ratio in the sap increases. And it's a general trend. It's not a perfect relationship, but we definitely see a trend here. So quick summary, pure sap potassium to calcium ratio above 25. Let's go back. So above 25 here, above 25 here, tend to be associated with a higher risk of a bitter pit. And pure sap potassium to calcium ratio in early to mid-July may provide a sensitive indication of bitter pit risk at harvest and after storage. And this work is, we're gonna continue this work, and we try to include a nitrogen to calcium ratio in the future. We're working on it, but we have not done all the work yet. So at the very end, I wanna thank Scott Hanning and all the Lake Ontario fruit growers for participating in the project. I also want to thank Scott Vanderwall Fruit Farm for allowing us using their plantings for developmental and nutrition studies of Gala and Honeycrisp from 2015 to 2017. Dr. Mike Rusky at the Cornell Nutrient Analysis Lab for help with the pure sap analysis and developing the method, and New York Apple Research and Development Program and USDA SCRI Apple Rootstock Program, Apple Rootstock Project for supporting the work. Any questions?
Do we know how M26 rootstock compares with the others?
M26 rootstock, in various rootstock trials, Terrence conducted, and also Stefano Masaki conducting in Washington State, M26 sort of in the middle. I mean, it's M26, its capacity for taking up calcium is not that great, and it's a more vigorous rootstock. So it's, I think, not as good as M9, and in terms of bitter pit incidence, in terms of bitter pit susceptibility, M9 does, does better job than M26, and definitely it's not as good as B9.
Okay, we have another question. Would you expect similar results if you did dry peel analysis similar as to what we do with leaf analysis?
Actually, we first did the dried peel tissue analysis. Similar results, but we think the peel sap analysis is more sensitive because it measures the water-soluble portion of the nutrients. So you don't need to worry about the structural part. I think that this is particularly the case for potassium, and also to some extent for calcium.
Okay, and we have a comment in the chat box. Seems like the incidence of bitter pit after storage wasn't all that high, even with higher calcium-potassium ratio. Looked like the higher ratio led to 5% to 10% bitter pit. Not that bad, exclamation point. And then she said, I mean, potassium-calcium ratio.
Yes, for 2019, because overall it was a low bitter pit year. And that is reflected in the range of the potassium to calcium ratio, 16 to 31. Like in 2017, the ratio goes up to over 40. And in some blocks, I think, it could go, the ratio could go up to 45, even 50. I think, yes, it was a low bitter pit year and doesn't appear to be a huge difference, but I think this ratio allows us to have a handle on the bitter pit risk level. And one of the reasons we want to launch this effort in Western New York is that this will allow the growers to use this, and also will allow us to expand the work to a wider range of altered conditions.
And we have another question in the Q&A box. Have you explored reasons for weak relationships where, for example, high ratios are not predictive of bitter pit?
We are looking into that now. And potassium to calcium ratio is only part of the story, we believe. I think nitrogen to calcium ratio could be an important one, but we have not figured out a very effective method to measure nitrogen in the sap. We're working on it. We have some good ideas. We're gonna test those ideas this year and next year. I think potassium to calcium ratio is an important part of the story, but not the whole story. It's obvious. And nitrogen to calcium ratio and other nutrient ratios, and also beyond nutrient ratios, I think other factors may play into this. So this is just another tool we could use to manage the risk of bitter pit incidence, not the entire thing. And a bitter pit is a complex problem, and it definitely requires a comprehensive approach. I think from all aspects. Nutrition is a big part of it, but other aspects as well, like crop load adjustment, tree vigor control, irrigation. All these need to be taken into consideration.
There's another question in the chat, in the Q&A box. Are you seeing any difference in bitter pit incidence between strains of Honeycrisp?
We have not seen much difference between different strains. Some of the red, the strains with more red color, we saw, those have very similar level of bitter pit incidence as others. So I have not seen much difference.
Are there any more questions now? Would anybody like to ask a question out loud? If you do, then raise your hand.
I saw Walter Blocker raise his hand, Mark.
Ah, okay, thank you. One moment, Walter. Okay, Walter, you should be able to speak if you unmute yourself. And the unmute, you need to move your cursor into,
The question, sorry, in the...
it's in the chat box.
Yeah,
Do we know what, he asks, do we know what growing conditions contribute to high bitter pit?
Okay, I think this must be a couple years ago where we had a lot of rainfall, especially in the latter part of the growing season. The fruits gets very big. I remember I was, must be 2017. I can't remember exactly. Terrence was still away at that time, and we went to Geneva. We saw a lot of bitter pit, and also that year, growers saw in commercial orchards, we saw a lot of bitter pit as well. And Cornell orchards, we saw quite a bit of bitter pit. When you over irrigate Honeycrisp, or when you have a very wet year, each fruit gets very big, and each fruit gets a lot of potassium. And that's a recipe for high bitter pit incidence. That's one extreme. Another extreme is in dry years. If the drought occurs fairly early in the season, at this time of the year or a couple weeks after petal fall, and that tends to give higher bitter pit incidence. And Terrence has seen that quite a bit. When you have very dry conditions, calcium uptake is compromised. And so is potassium uptake. But generally speaking, drought conditions affects calcium uptake more than potassium. So you end up with low calcium level in the fruit and higher potassium to calcium ratio as well. So, and I think weather pattern has a larger impact on bitter pit incidence than almost, all the other management practices. Of course, in crop load is another important factor. When you have wet conditions or over irrigation conditions, when the trees have low crop load, that would give you the highest risk of bitter pit incidence.
I would like to add just a little bit to that answer, and maybe Chris Watkins would want to add, but our studies over the years have shown, first, crop load is one of the key factors. You have light crop, you have more bitter pit. Heavy crop, you have almost none. The second factor that's popped up in 2 studies is drought. And 2 time periods seem to be more critical. Early in the season, around bloom. If we had drought, we always had more bitter pit. And that's kind of what we had a little bit this year. And what I think is happening is that calcium is not taken up into the fruit in the early part of the season as much as in wetter springs. And it's early in the season when calcium can be moved into the fruit and distributed down through all of the fruit, including the lower half of the fruit, because there are vascular connections in young fruits that allow the movement of calcium down into the fruit. But as fruits get more mature and they start expanding, those vascular tissues are broken down. And recent work by Lee Kalsitz, who have done some fabulous work on this, they show basically when we get to mid-July, there's no real good vascular connections in the fruit. And so calcium that you do move in through the stem can't get to the bottom. And that's where we get bitter pit. Our study on this drought showed that a second critical time period was July, the first 2 weeks of July. So I want to comment that 2020 is a really worrisome year. We've had dry weather through June. We're already seeing some evidence in leaves that calcium levels are low. We're very interested to see what this fruit sap analysis is going to show us through this effort, but I'm predicting that we're going to be low on calcium. And so it could be a very troublesome year. The last point is the recent work by Lee Kalsitz in Washington showed that if you have a lot of water in that last month before harvest, say mid-August to mid-September, fruits get really big and you get more bitter pit. But if you can somehow impose some limited drought during that period to keep fruits from expanding too much, you have less bitter pit. Now, we can't control our rainfall. Out west, they can shut down water on Honeycrisp, but that will also play into what we see this year. So those factors, the crop load, the amount of water and when the drought comes, and then lastly, the nutrient content of the fruit, and whether we get calcium into the lower part of the fruit play a critical role in this bitter pit development. Chris, I invite you if you have a comment.
Terence, I think you've summed it up well. I don't have anything to add. Just as the reality is, though, there's no just simple one answer. It's a combination, and our poor apples have to, the biological systems that have to integrate all these factors. And we can only go so far as scientists in terms of coming up with all the answers. But I would say, I would agree with you that this year is potentially a bad year.
To me, what would be really bad is if we have this drought through July and then it just turned rainy in August and we get large fruit size anyway, and we just didn't get enough calcium put into the fruits early. I guess I would add one other thing that the work done by Lee Kalsitz again from Washington showed that what we spray on the fruits with our calcium sprays is such a minuscule amount of calcium in relation to what the fruits really need that sometimes it's like you really can't change. If you're set up for bitter pit, your calcium sprays have only a minimal benefit, but we still do them because it's the best we can do.
Yeah, so Terence, let me add to that though, that I think you're right, but there's no doubt that a good comprehensive calcium spray regime will help. I'm a strong believer that should be evenly applied during the growing season. You'll find some people in some parts of the world will advocate for early, some people will advocate for late, but I think that reflects different climatic conditions. And so with our variable growing conditions in New York, I like to have that consistent application and not trying to guess when is best. But the other point that I would make with Honeycrisp is an unusual apple in that most of the bitter pit is sting associated. So a lot of the work on bitter pit in the world is done with apples where bitter pit appears inside of the flesh. And I think I would argue, hopefully, that with Honeycrisp, because it's more associated with the skin, the effectiveness of calcium sprays is hopefully a little more higher.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Chris. I agree with what you said. A calcium spray, you don't want to just target early or target late. I think really you have to evenly spread it out throughout the growing season. That's very important, because if you only spray early in the season, at that time the fruits are so small, because it is the calcium taken up by the fruit that makes the difference, not the calcium taken up by the leaves. So that early in the season, the fruit surface is fairly small, and then late, in the season, the fruit size is bigger. Generally, they can intercept more calcium. So you have to cover the entire season, fruit developmental, the entire fruit growth period.
So there's another related question in the Q&A box. Any recommendations for adjusting irrigation on lighter crop trees in this dry year? Is there a good time of fruit development to start irrigating less?
I would like to try to answer that. that need moisture in the soil for movement of both potassium and calcium. But let's just talk about calcium from the soil to the roots and into the plant. I think that irrigating in early in the season, even near bloom on a dry year, but certainly this year, the 1st of June through the whole month of June, would be critical for the uptake of calcium in the early half of the season. However, if you have light crop, then we would want to cut irrigation, say near the end of July, or start to reduce it from the midpoint of July on, so that we don't have too large a fruit size and we just blow it up even further with a lot of rainfall we'll get in August, but you can control certainly through your irrigation what you can do. So my strategy would be pay attention. Like we had a webinar a week ago on this irrigation issue, but pay attention to the irrigation model and try to manage to basically keep the soil reservoir full in May and June and the first half of July. But if your crop is light, start drying down that crop and that soil in late July and in August. And potentially you could get what Lee Calcett's got in Washington, where reduced water from mid-August on gave less bitter pit.
Would anyone else like to address the question? Okay, so we're going to go to one more, another question in the chat. And I think, Terrence, you may be bumping your laptop or your microphone and it's affecting your sound. Does it make sense to delay hand thinning to proper crop load until late July to prevent oversized fruit if crop load isn't so heavy as to affect return bloom?
Now that's a strategy that a number of people out west have tried. It seems like a good strategy if that crop load does not inhibit return bloom. It's just a very sad situation when you maybe have prevented a little bitter pit one year, but then you end up with no bloom the next year. And it's just such a finicky variety that I'm hesitant to tell people to wait to hand thin. Now, my real world result is I go into orchards where people think they've thinned properly, and I do fruit counts, and almost always they're way over on Honeycrisp. And then we get light or no bloom the next year. So if we could really manage crop load precisely, we could leave a slightly heavier crop load as long as it didn't pass some limit to help hold down fruit size, but then come in and hand thin in mid to late July without getting negative impacts on return bloom. We continue to try to figure out if these ethereal sprays and maybe spraying earlier with ethereal in the month of June could help us overcome biennial bearing, even if we're carrying slightly too heavy of a crop. It really comes down to how many seeds are on that tree producing gibberellins that inhibit flowering of Honeycrisp, and it's very sensitive to too many seeds producing too much gibberellin.
All right, we have a question, but I think we're about to answer this with Mario's presentation. I'll just read it out loud. How do we sample Honeycrisp and where do we send the peel? I'm sure that's exactly what Mario's about to talk about. We also have a comment in the chat box. I would like to see a study of the vascular tissue in fruit from trees that got apogee at pink versus those that didn't. Could the mechanism for apogee at pink be that it strengthens the vascular tissue so it resists disruption longer and gets calcium out to the calyx for a longer period?
I'd like to comment. I think that's a wonderful idea, Jill, and that's one that I'd love to see done. We right now at Geneva are in the process of interviewing a replacement scientist for Alan Laxo. And if the scientist that I would prefer to see as hire comes, that's one of the studies he would do, because he has the capabilities of doing anatomical work along with physiology work. But right now, nobody has really done that well, and it's something for the future.
Okay, if there are no more questions, we will move on to Mario's portion of the talk. And Mario, you can start sharing your screen.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, very short. This is just the time that it's gonna take to do this kind of thing. You're gonna be working with one sample from your farm. Perhaps you're gonna spend 25, 30 minutes. This week, this afternoon, going to collect the fruits, and you're gonna be cleaning the fruits, and you're gonna be peeling, or you can start tomorrow the fruit collection, the fruit cleaning and the peeling. And once you are done with the peeling, you have to store those peels in your freezer. And later, next week, we're gonna go to your site, to your packing house, or to your farm, and we're gonna pick those frozen peels, and we're gonna transport all the peels from the Lake Ontario fruit region next Wednesday to Ithaca. So that's just to give you an idea, a quick, brief idea of how we wanna do this. Definitely, if you are collecting more than 5, 10, 15 blocks in your farm, 40 blocks or something like that, definitely you're gonna you're gonna spend the morning collecting those fruitlets. Try to process them, get the peeling done the same day, and put all the peels in the freezer. So this is the protocol. We're not gonna discuss or read this. This is in our website. It's in links in our website. We have been sending this through the fruit bags. So I invite you to, this is a screenshot from the YouTube video that we produced for launching this idea. The selection of the trees. So we just need 30 fruitlets from a particular block. So you have to select those 30 trees that represent the Honeycrisp block. And we encourage you to flag that area, flag the rows at least, do a sketch in your notebook of how you sample, how you enter, what area of the orchard you collected your 30 fruitlets. You're gonna collect only one fruitlet per tree. You need 30 trees, 30 fruitlets. And hopefully you can also tag the 30 trunks of those trees at the bottom, close to the ground, just to make sure that you know exactly where you are sampling. Put all the fruit in a plastic bag or in a clean container like I'm doing there in the video. So once you have your sample like there, that I have my 30 fruitlet in that kind of little bowl, you're gonna clean the surface of the sample fruit with a wet paper towel with purified water that you can get at any store, Tops or Wegman, or you can get distilled water. And you're gonna squeeze off the extra water, and you're gonna wipe off any residue of the fruit on the fruit surface. So this is kind of an important step. Don't overdo it. Don't squeeze very well the paper towel. Like up there, I got that purified water from Tops, and I'm gonna squeeze that paper towel. I made that mistake in the past. I was overdoing it. I really made sure that I squeeze everything, and I clean the surface just to remove any residue. Clean your hands, use gloves, a clean surface in your kitchen area or in the lab, and clean that surface very well before you start peeling. So that's just a screenshot from the video. The video is gonna take you 5-6 minutes to see everything from the beginning to the end. This is just 30 seconds. For the fruit peeling, it's important to have a good peeler. Get that one today. You're gonna spend something like that, $91, $2. There you're gonna have your fruitlets. Use a kitchen peeler to remove the 2 pieces of peel on 2 opposite sides of each fruit from the stem end to the calyx end. So here we have a little clip for you just to see. So that's the way how I peel. One side, you turn around the apple, you get the other, you peel there, and the opposite. So you get 2 peels per fruitlet, 60 peels total. That is the front and top view of the Honeycrisp fruit peel from the stand. Yeah, for you to make sure that you understand what we are looking for. It's 30 fruitlets. You're gonna be able to get a small portion there. You can use a big storage bag, a sandwich bag. You're gonna be able to, like in this case for the video, I use a big storage 1 gallon bag, too big perhaps to put in my freezer, in your freezer. You can use also a sandwich bag with the minimum amount of information, the farm name, the grower name, the contact info, the block that you sample. You're gonna have more than one site. We hope many growers perhaps are gonna decide to do more than 1 or 2 or 10. We have growers that are planning to 30, 40 sites and the sampling date. So it's very important that you label very well your bags before they go to the freezer. And then the sample submission is gonna be at then. We're gonna have an online submission process and a payment method that we should have it done by the end of this week, early this week, because those frozen peels are gonna be collected by us next week. Like I told you at the beginning, on Monday, we're gonna be collecting next Monday, the 20, Tuesday, Wednesday morning, and on Wednesday afternoon, we should be in Ithaca with everything to start squeezing the peels and running the ICP on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, until we get all the analysis done by the end of July. So that is an overview of this process. Questions? I don't know.
Okay, we have a question in the Q&A box. Given the issue of calcium residue from sprays, would you consider normal water wash before rinsing with distilled water?
Normal water. Okay, I don't know Dr. Chen there, but we haven't been using that kind of water, so we want to be very careful. Not gonna take 1 single minute to go to Tops or women and get purified water, aquafine or distilled water. You should use the right kind of water, not any water coming from the hose that can have any kind of residue coming from there. I don't know, Lilian, what do you think you should? Do you think it's a good practice?
I would prefer to get a few bottles of the purified water and wash them instead of using water like well water or any other type of water, because some of the water could have a lot of calcium in it. Mm. So I would suggest using only purified water. 30 fruitlets, you can buy a big bottle and wash them and then wipe it. I think that would be the best.
So this is Mark just asking a question. Would that be, in the store you often have a choice between gallons of spring water or distilled water. I would think the distilled water would be the choice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, distilled water, some of the bottled water, say it's purified. Those waters are good too. Yeah, distilled water is good.
Okay, are there other questions in the Q&A box, or if you would like to raise your hand?
So I just want to emphasize, we're going to be collecting all the peels, all the frozen peels next week. Sanopa is going to be in Wayne County. Sanopa is going to be in Orleans and Niagara County. So by the end of this week, so I encourage you to start collecting fruit, peeling for the rest of the week. Don't wait beyond Saturday, because we're going to start collecting those peels. We cannot come back. We get all the batches of the peels and we go with everything to Ithaca. We're doing it the old-fashioned way, just to control everything what we're trying to do, so we can really give you the right results and we don't have any issue with any transfer of bad sample in the lab or anything. There are multiple steps, so please label your bags very well and see the video.
And the video is on the Lake Ontario Fruit YouTube channel, correct?
Yeah. We have been sending the links through the fruit facts in our newsletter, but everybody's so busy. So I just want to emphasize that it's a 5 minutes video just to see.
Okay, we have another question. Wipe the fruit off, then dry with another paper towel.
That's preferred. After you wipe the fruit with a wet paper towel, sometimes you see, depending on how hard you squeeze the wet paper towel, you're going to see some water on the fruit surface. Use another piece of paper towel to blow dry before you peel the fruit.
Yeah. Good question.
We have another question. How much does this cost per sample?
You want to answer that, Lilian?
I think it's a $15.
Yeah, gonna be, yeah.
Mario, could you confirm that? I don't know the
Yeah, it's gonna be $15. That is in the protocol, that is in the video. It's $15. So we decided to charge just that amount. So I think so it's very reasonable. Hopefully growers are gonna sample all their Honeycrisp blocks, mature, young planting, just to get an idea of the nutritional status at this time of the year.
And just to clarify, a sample is a bag with peelings from 30 fruit. That represents a block.
60 peels from 30 fruitlets, and that sample represents a particular block that you are interested, because it's uniform, because it has a 3A, the same rootstock, same uniformity. And another sample is something else that is a different soil type, different rootstock, different training system, something different that made that site different than the other one. And you need to sample that. It's the same rationale for soil analysis, for leaf analysis, for peel analysis. It's one more information in your toolbox.
Do we have any other questions before the closing remarks occur? Okay, not seeing any. I think
I'm going to stop sharing, Mark.
Yes, and so I think if either Li Lang or Terrence has a slide to share, you can share, or just present your closing remarks.
I have a slide I'm going to share. So I wanted just to summarize what we're asking. We're hoping that every single farm in Western New York will participate in this effort. I'd love to see 500 samples collected. I think that every single packing company and sales company should really want all the Honeycrisp blocks that are coming to that packing house to go through this process, so that on the week of harvest, you'll have sort of a passport for each block with the information. It requires people this week, sometime between today and Saturday, to collect the samples, then peel the fruitlets, and then freeze them in your freezer. The samples will be collected, as Mario said, sometime between Monday and Wednesday of next week. You will be required to go online and fill out the information that's required for us and properly label each sample bag. But we commit that if you do that and we get the samples by Wednesday of next week, we will get the data and give you a report back to your farm with the specific information about your blocks, whether it's 1 block on your farm or 50 blocks on your farm. We will also include the averages of nutrient values for that region, say Wayne County or Orleans County or Niagara County, or maybe pieces of Wayne County. We haven't quite decided yet, depending on how many samples. So you'll be able to compare your block against sort of the others in your area. We will not divulge the information from each specific farm. No one will know your farm from any others. Only you will get the data for your farm. This then, we hope, will be coupled with point number 4, your participation in the effort to do the passive bitter pit prediction process that Chris Watkins developed. And we're proposing to hold another webinar on around August 11th, whenever we can get Chris scheduled to allow it. but that we suspect that if we can get everybody that's involved in the nutrient process in July to participate in this passive bitter pit study, not study, but effort, in which you will sample 100 fruits, put them in a box on or around August 11th or that week, store them just at room temperature, and then evaluate bitter pit after 3 weeks and communicate those results back to us. That will allow us to provide you and or your packer, if you wish, sort of information on each block on your farm, and will allow you to work with him to segregate your fruit at harvest. You'll have this information at least a week before harvest on the passive, and at least a month before harvest on the nutrients, to allow you then to plan what you're going to do with marketing and storage of that fruit. Now, for example, I end point number 5 just as a teaser for you to join us in the webinar in August on this passive bitter pit prediction method. Chris has said, and I agree, that if that test, along with the nutrient balances, shows that the risk of bitter pit is low, then we would say precondition the fruit in the normal way we precondition bitter or Honeycrisp. But if that passive study shows that you have a high risk of bitter pit, preconditioning only makes it worse. And so we would suggest you not precondition. And so that specific decision needs to be made as you deliver fruit to the storage company, and that can be made with some real hard data from your farm. So if you were sort of on the fence about whether to participate, jump in. Sample every Honeycrisp block on your farm. It's only $15 a sample. That's a cheap bargain for the kind of information that you'll get, and we'll guarantee that the information gets back to you in time for you, along with your storage operator and marketer, to make decisions on that block. I will just end by saying I'm worried about 2020 because of the drought and the hot weather. I don't know what the rest of the season will bring, but these two efforts will help us go into the storage cycle of 2020 with much better feeling of what to do with each block of Honeycrisp. So with that, I'll conclude, and we're at the end of our time. But if you have questions, I'm willing to stay on and answer questions, and I'm sure maybe others of the panel as well. But thanks for participating. I hope you'll all go sample your Honeycrisp now and get the peeling done and get the samples frozen.
Yes, so let's leave the phones open for a minute or two in the Q&A box to see what other questions we have. You can type in the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand if you want to ask it out loud. So I'm not really seeing anything pop up. If you still are typing it in, we'll address it, and I'm going to hand it over to Craig Kalki, the team leader, who was able to wrap up the session today. We do have a question that just popped up. Do you have a link for Mario's cleaning and peeling video? I can put that in the chat box right now. That's going to be our YouTube channel, and let me do that. If you also go to YouTube on your browser and search for Lake Ontario Fruit Program, I'm sure that you would get a direct link to the program.
Yeah. Can folks hear me okay? This is Craig.
Yes.
So, great. Did we have another summary slide with any more dates on it, Mario, of things, or no? Or I'm sorry.
Mark presented one at the beginning with the
Okay.
yours webinar on the 16th.
Yeah, just to plug for our webinar this Thursday, same time at noon. It's focused for COVID guidance for apple packing houses. You can register, use the registration link in the Fruit Facts newsletter. It's on our website. You can put in questions ahead of time. We really encourage you to do that. We have David Bell from Orleans Emergency Management, Public Health. We have Rich Stupp from Cornell Labor. We have Betsy Bin from Institute of Food Safety. We have Chris Watkins and myself and Mark. So it should be really good for packing house people to get their questions answered. as we continue with this quote unquote new reality. Also wanted to again thank the sponsors, Valent, Agro 100, and all the packing houses that are contributing to this effort. Really greatly appreciated. Chris Bucalo at Niagara Fresh, Chris Whipple and Ward Dobbins at H.H. Dobbins, John Russell, Scott Henning at Lake Ontario Fruit, Chris Oakes at LynOaken Farms, Phil Smith at Pomona Packing, Steve Rice at Sun Orchard Fruit Company, and Scott Vanderwall at Wayne County Fruit Sales. Greatly appreciated. Another thing that Terrence, you had mentioned, we can articulate this too as we get towards the August 11th webinar. For the passive model, we might be able to get folks to put their boxes of fruit in an empty storage room. And I might be able to help with the evaluations ahead of time too. I mean, we did that last year at Lake Ontario Fruit, and Liz and I were able to evaluate about 21 blocks in a couple hours. So that might be another option, at least for growers to put their fruit in a central location, you know, a storage room that's at room temperature, something to work through.
Great
Greg,
idea, Greg.
Yeah, I really like that idea because that sort of standardize the conditions.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
When I was talking to the packing houses about this effort, it's kind of what I had proposed, to have their growers who normally store their Honeycrisp there to put them in the room there with their fruit label.
Before we close the webinar, I just want to make a comment on Honeycrisp leaf analysis. I've been thinking about this for a few years now. I think the regular leaf sampling time is early August for other varieties. But for Honeycrisp, I really believe we should take leaf samples before the end of June. There are two reasons for this. First, typically Honeycrisp trees stop their shoot growth by June the 20th or June the 25th. So at that time, by the end of June, all the shoot growth has stopped. So as long as the shoot growth has stopped, we can take leaf samples for nutrient analysis. That's one reason. Another, perhaps more important reason, is that starting from the first week in July, Honeycrisp leaves, when you have a low crop load situation, Honeycrisp leaves develop this zonal chlorosis, which messes up the leaf nutrient levels. So I suggest that starting from next year, growers should take leaf samples for Honeycrisp trees by the end of June.
Lilian, can I interrupt you?
Sure.
Why we don't continue waiting, like the traditional, when we get to 90, 95 days after full bloom for the rest of the cultivar, but for Honeycrisp, we should send that information to growers via fruit fax tomorrow. So I don't know, we should start doing it earlier, even this year.
This year, at this time of the year, is still good. I mean, mid-July.
I don't know if that's
starting
gonna
from
make a difference. Yeah.
Yes, starting from next year, I think we should take Honeycrisp leaf samples by the end of June. It's a better time than the normal early August leaf sampling time, because for Honeycrisp, for those two reasons, we need to move up the leaf sampling time.
Yeah, but should we try to tell the industry it's July 14th today, so still we have 15 more days that we should. That is my question, Lilian.
Sure.
Should we start kind of providing that new recommendation and act? Still, perhaps it's perhaps a little late, but perhaps we can. All the fruit, the shoot are set. Everything is with a bud, they are taped. Everything is ready. So those, and the leaves began to change the color a little bit last week.
Yeah.
The early sides.
Especially for trees with a low crop load.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so we should react and mention this week.
Thank you, yeah, for Mark putting up that slide, our July 16th webinar, apple packing houses, and then July 20th, hosted by CC Eastern New York, high-tech precision orchard spraying. They got Dr. Jason DeVoe from Omafra, Ontario and Canada, and I think another really good speaker. I highly recommend that webinar. I believe that's going to be recorded as well.
We have one more question that popped up in the chat Q&A box. Can we use the peel sample in place of leaf analysis?
Can we replace leaf analysis with pure sap analysis? That's the question. At this point, I would prefer to still have both. Do the pure sap analysis in addition to leaf analysis. I think a leaf analysis, if we could do it by the end of June, that would give us some indication on the tree nutrient status. The pure sap analysis it was designed specifically for fruit nutrient status. Of course, the ultimate goal is to get the right balance of nutrients in the fruit. But the leaf analysis, I think, still has some value. If you do leaf analysis late, like in August, I think the value is much less because of the zonal chlorosis problem in Honeycrisp leaves.
Okay, that is all the questions I see.
I really want to thank our speakers, Terrence and Marion Lelang, and Mark. Great job with the moderating and the questions and the introduction. Really appreciate it. We will definitely see everybody, hopefully, and we'll set a date when we know it for the passive bitter pit prediction, the next step. Hopefully it'll be on and around August 11th. Anything else from any of the panelists? Excellent. Everybody have a great day.